started. What did we learn yesterday? What was the standout for you guys? What do you want to learn more about tonight? How are we feeling about our first real full stack app?
I believe last night I learned that you have to use state and props in order to set the same return on sent messages and receive messages.
Yeah, we don't necessarily always have to use state and props. We needed state because we had some data coming in from the API that we needed to display to the end user. So whenever we have information that's going to update, we need to use state. And then we needed to use the props because technically React, we could do an all one giant file, right? Technically, we could use React without components, but then our code would be a mess. So the reason why we need those props is to send that data between components, right? It's to be able to have that data up at the parent and then be able to pass that data down via the props. So we use both state and props, which is common in React, but not necessarily a requirement. Ali, you mentioned being able to see why different React files are used. That's good. Not always a requirement to break it down into as many files as we did, but starting to see how that interface starts to come together, right? And being able to separate out that code makes it a little bit easier to manage. Taylor, I'm guessing your dropdown, you mean your capstone? It's okay. We often have to break it in order to make it better. Sometimes we take one step forward and two steps forward and one step back. That's okay. That happens. Interesting. Yeah, sometimes that is related around the data that you're setting into the map. And it is expecting data to be in a certain format, and it's not quite breaking down the same way that the API or the database is returning. So we will save that for our one-on-one unless you can schedule one earlier, or I can stick around after class if you want to take a quick look at it. Anything else from yesterday? Any questions, any concerns before we dive into part 2 of Chat App tonight? The good news is we don't have to start it over from scratch. The bad news is that we've got to set it up differently because we aren't starting it over from scratch. But this should be much easier than starting it from scratch. We good to dive in? Okay. I'm going to share my screen. We are headed to the C5 My Code to week 18. We're going to go to our day 1, and we've deleted node modules before, but only in the front end. So we want to delete our node modules both in the front end and the back end. So delete node modules in the front end, only node modules, nothing else. Go to our chat backend, delete those node modules. Then we are backing out to our day 1 folder. We're going to go ahead and duplicate that and rename that day 2. Delete node modules both in the back end and in the front end. Duplicate your day 1, rename it to day 2.
Max, I'm doing what you're telling me, but look at this. Vermont only gives out paper straws. They don't do plastic.
California, the whole West Coast is like that.
What? How am I supposed to drink my
for the world?
This is I didn't know that.
You can always pop off the lid and just drink it directly.
During class? Okay.
We delete node modules, Palash, because it is quicker to delete them and then reinstall them than it is to just duplicate them directly. The other reason we do it is because we have multiple copies of our code, and node modules is easily the biggest part of that. So we primarily do it just so it's a little bit faster to reinstall them. But it is primarily because we don't want gigabytes and gigabytes of node modules for the same project on your computer. So we're going to take our front end and we're going to drag that into VS Code and get that open. Then we're going to take our back end, drag that into VS Code and also get that open. We're going to right click on our package.json in both of them and npm install, and then rinse and repeat over in our front end. So right click on package.json, down to open an integrated terminal, and npm install there. Once both of them are installed, you can npm start on both of them. And I will note here that if you start your front end before you start your back end, you notice I don't have my back end running. It's going to give me this giant error, failed to fetch. I don't have my back end running, so how can it go out and fetch anything from my API? My API server isn't running yet. So it's okay if you get an error in the front end, head over to the back end, npm start up your back end. And when that is up and running, now you can refresh your front end and have it back up and running the way we left it off yesterday. Excuse me. If you have an error that it cannot connect to the database, open up your, nope, not your Postman, your Postgres. Postman, get out of here. Open up your Postgres and make sure that your start button is clicked and running in the background. npm install in both of them. Once npm install is done on both of them, npm start on both of them. If you have an error in your front end, failed to fetch, go ahead and refresh after your back end is running, and we should be back up to where we left off yesterday. I'm going to start 2 live shares. I'm going to make sure I'm not hijacking either of your ports. I'm going to open up my server.js. And we are going to start in message input tonight and app.js. So if you want to open up both of those, you can. Let me shrink my terminals down here a little bit so we can see more of my code. And we'll give you all a minute and then we will dive on in. Reminder, tomorrow we've got some graduates coming in to give alumni presentations. And then on Thursday, we have Open Hack, 6 p.m., no class. Hopefully we will see you there.
Wait, so tomorrow's class is in person?
No, virtual.
Okay.
Matt, you said we're starting with what in
App.js and message input in the front end, and then server.js in the back end.
thank you.
Excuse me. Anyone have questions? Anyone need help? Anyone need another minute? Amberlynn, what's up?
Can I have assistance? Okay, in my terminal.
Yep.
Okay. My backend.
Yep.
And
You tried to npm start before you npm installed. So you're now in limbo because it is giving you an error, but the server is still running. So Control-C to stop it.
Okay.
Now you can do your npm install. And now you can do your NPM start and you should be back in business. And if you switch over to your front end and refresh, oh, NPM start there.
Okay,
And you're good to go.
thank you.
Do we want to red light, green light it like we did last night, or do we want to just give you control?
Please.
Yes, to red light, green light?
Yes.
Yes, okay, we will do that again. One last thing before we red light, green light. Let's pop open our beekeeper. Just so we have that window open. Good to have all the steps so that we can debug. I'm going to go to my local DB. And this is the only thing that we're not duplicating. We can't really easily duplicate an entire database, or we can, but we shouldn't be. So we are going to reuse that chat database from last night. So to start from the beginning, I popped open Beekeeper. I double clicked on my local DB here to get past the connection screen. Then up at the top for Hack Upstate, I went down to chat and I have my messages, and I'm just going to double click on messages to open up that table and have what I have in there from last night. Now that I've got Beekeeper open, I'm going to minimize that for now, and I'm just going to take a reflection of where we're at. So I am in my messages app. This data is coming from my Beekeeper all the way in the back end. How is that flowing? Well, I'm going from my front end and I've got a use effect. My use effect is going out to my localhost 3010. I know that's my back end, and getting the messages. The messages line up over here. The messages are selecting from the database and sending back the rows in the JSON. We are then taking that JSON and setting it into the state called messages. Messages gets passed down via a prop to our messages list. And if I look in my messages list, it is getting that prop and mapping over them, looping over them. React wants to know what to show for each one of them. So we have our if the message is sent, show the sent message, otherwise show the received message. What that is doing is going down one level deeper. It is also using the props, whether it's passing down the entire content or the message that has the content in it. And then if we open that and take a look at that, that is what we see over here. So I always like to give myself like a 10-15 minute recap every morning or whenever I'm rolling into work to go, all right, do I understand where I left my code off, right? Because if you don't understand where you left it off, you're going to go off and do the next logical thing and realize that you didn't finish that last feature. So always good to recap, make sure you understand how this is all working before we move on. Okay, red light. We now have our message input down at the bottom. I'm going to type something in. I'm going to hit the send button and the whole page refreshes and nothing happens. So that's the first thing I need to do. I need to say, hey, I'm going to type a message here. I need to send that message up to the server. I need the server to record it in the database. And then I need to figure out what's next from there. The what's next from there is 10 times harder than actually getting that in the database. So we'll do red light, green light a couple times to get that whole process working. So I'm going to head back to my front end. And normally the flow is always front end to back end to database, database to back end to front end. So we almost always go through all 6 of those steps. So in my message input, I have my input text right here, and it's in the form, but I'm thinking about this and I'm like, I don't want to leave this as an uncontrolled input. I can get the data out of an uncontrolled input from a form submission, right? Event, target, elements, the input name, dot value. But the problem is I can't reset that value back to empty. And I really want to be able to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const inputted text and set inputted text. is equal to a U state. I'm going to make sure my import comes in. And whenever we're linking up state to an input, state does not like, input state does not like to be null. It likes to be an empty string instead. Gives you a weird error message if you don't put an empty string in. So start as an empty string. Then we've got to link this input up. So we say the value is going to be the inputted text. And on change of that value, take the event and set the inputted text to the event target value. Again, I need to do this as a controlled input because I want React to be able to control what is in that input. After we send the message, I want to be able to clear out that input text. Now, I need to handle the submit of this form. So on my form, I'm going to say on submit, send message. I'm going to const send message, and I know it's going to be async because I got to do a fetch to the backend. So I'm going to const response, await my fetch to HTTP localhost 3010. And now I'm like, message, right? I'm sending a message. But I don't want it to get the messages. I want it to put a new message in. So in order to send anything new, we do a post request instead. So I'm going to say server.post to my message. And that's going to be async recres. And all I want to do, I'm going to res.send something back. I don't know what I'm sending back yet. Doesn't matter, just a placeholder for now. And all I'm going to do is console log the rec.body. All I want to do, it's suicidal to try and do a full sec flow all in one loop. So I need to break this down into testable bits. Almost out of green light. I come over here and I've got to tell it a couple things in my fetch. I can't just tell it to go to message. I told it, hey, my message endpoint is a post endpoint. So I have to line that up over here. I'm going to say method is post. I also told my backend yesterday that I was sending it some JSON, but I can't just throw that in the body. I've got to do two things whenever I'm sending JSON. If I'm receiving JSON, I just parse that sucker and I'm good to go. But whenever I'm sending JSON into my backend, I've got to give it a heads up. In the headers, the content type is application JSON. And I also want to send it a body. The body is going to have the message text, and that is going to come from the inputted text. The problem is this is an object, and we know the internet does not like objects. It only likes strings. So what we do is we JSON.stringify it. Green light. All right, that's the best I can do for getting it all on the screen. Just so I know when you guys are done, once you have it working, go ahead and vote in the poll. Ignore the question and it says, did you get it working? Just vote yes if you are caught up, or no if you are just along for the ride tonight.
Okay, I just have one question.
Shoot.
So That's okay. That send message is underneath our it's inside of our return.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, whenever we see curly braces inside of our return, we're snapping out of HTML mode and we're going into JavaScript mode. So the curly braces are like a template literal. They let us cheat and pull JavaScript into our HTML. Just like we're using the curly braces here, we're linking our value, which is regular HTML, up to our inputted text, which is up here in our JavaScript. Same for this on change, right? We put that curly brace in there, and then all of a sudden we can use JavaScript syntax right in our HTML. Like about half of you guys are done. Don't forget to vote in Zoom. Anyone need another minute? Okay. The end result should be, if we come in here and we type in ABC and hit send, the page is still going to refresh. But if we take a look in our back-end terminal, nothing works and the world hates me. Throw one more line in here. See if this fixes it. Okay, so 2 lines that I forgot. If you are caught up, I forgot to put this event in, and then the event prevent default. The page was refreshing so quickly, it didn't even have a chance to make the fetch call to the back end. So once I put that in, what we should see over in our back end is our message text ABC. If you don't see that, make sure you've got your front end and your back end matching here. A lot of data flowing through here. We're going to the state. From the state, we're going to a form submission. From the form submission, we're doing a fetch. The fetch has to do a post and a headers and a JSON stringify, and it has to access the right value from the state. And then on the back end, we have to have our HTTP method right. We've got to have our endpoint right, and we have to have our console log in so it's coming out the body properly. So you should see, can you see the bottom of my screen on the screen share? Can you see the object coming out? Cool. You should see this message text and whatever you typed in if you type something in here and hit the send button. Shannon, see, I knew I was going to catch someone when, as soon as I said, no, this is what you actually need done.
Yeah, I'm just getting 404 not found in my console. I'm not seeing anything.
Okay, check your message is singular and your message is singular. Make sure that your method is post and your method over here is post. And if you're still getting a 404, share your screen.
Okay.
And Jen, I'm glad all those light bulbs came on. We're going to go through and I'm going to put all of that in the step-by-step notes as well, so we can get that flow towards the end of class.
It's showing up in my terminal. Thank you.
I don't even know what it was that you said, but man, this everything, I don't know, something about state, everything just went into pictures and it all just made so much sense.
That's why I teach, baby. Love those moments. All right, everyone good? Anyone need another minute? Okay, let's keep on going. Red light. Okay, so we've got our data back here in the body, but that's not really enough. We know that the body is an object back here using message text. But what do I want to do with that message text? I want to shove it in the database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say await my db.query. And this time we are going to insert into messages. The two columns that I am inserting into are going to be content and sent, because I want it to generate the ID for me. So I'm going to say content and sent. And the values that I want to insert are going to be the template literal coming from rec.body.message text. Why is it message text? Because we can see that object here and we can see that object right here. Inputted text is our state, but what we're calling it when we send it to the back end is message text. So we do our message text here. Then we also want to put in that this is a sent message. The user sent this, so we're going to put in true. We save that. I come back to my front end, not green light yet. Give it a second. I'm going to hit the send button and it looks like nothing happened. But I've got another message text over here in my console. And if I go to my Beekeeper Studio and refresh, I get my ABC and my true. So something's happening, just not everything that I need. Well, I don't want to just insert it. I also want to get all of the existing messages. But we already have done that. An insert just tells you whether or not it inserted it or not. We need all the messages now that the insert is done. So I'm going to copy my entire server.get messages, and I'm going to paste that on top of my res.send. I should only have one res.send. So I'm res.sending back the messages. I'm going to go back to my front end. Then I'm going to use that. I'm going to say my data is coming from awaiting my response.json. And then I'm going to console log out my data over here. Not making them show up yet, but if everything works, I should be able to say second test, pop open my console, and when I hit the send button, I should have an array with all of my messages in it. Only going to work when you type something in and hit send. That is going to trigger the full stack flow. Green light. Can you guys see my screen if I just bump it out to that? Is that still readable for you guys? Okay. We've reached the point in the cohort where I go nuts being able to only have like 7 lines of code on my screen at the same time. So the new sections over here, this server.post, we put in the insert, the select, and the res.send. And then we also over here are parsing out our JSON and our console logging out our data. Oh, and I should start a poll so I know where you guys are at. Poll is live in Zoom once you get it working. Notes are good, Rain. The benefit of the red light, green light system. And we will also go in and do inline comments and number everything out at the end of class tonight to keep things in sync. Allie, what padding is driving you crazy? Because mine has a little gap between the two of them, and I've got the container going on there. Are you missing either of those?
So wait, my messages are like, let me see. Mine's are
Overlapping?
showing up. Yeah, but they're on the right side. They're all saying like, I sent hello a couple times over and over and over.
Well,
And
if they should be on the right side because you're the one sending hello, right? It's only the messages in the database that show up over on the left.
Okay. Yeah, they're like right overlapped on top of each other.
I added in my app.css, this row margin bottom 10px,
Okay.
and that should get them on all off of each other. Hey, anyone need? Yep, plush.
So yeah, I got it working, but like I have a question. Like in case of like API calls, we can go into console and kind of see like what we can apply a dot operator on to get that data. Like how can we see it in the backend? Is there a way to, for example, like how do we know it's result dot rows or result
Yep.
dot or request dot body dot message text? I know
Just
where
the console log. So right here, we console.log the rec.body, and we saw that it is message text in that backend terminal. So the same goes for here. If we console log out our result, and I make another API call, you'll see in the terminal, we get this giant thing, this giant object back. And it's sending us back command, the row count, the OID, and then the rows. And I'm like, oh, this is the data that I want. And rows happens to be in an array. So that's how I know to do my result.rows because, oops, down here, because you can always console log it out. You'll just see the results of the console log in the terminal instead of in the console in the browser.
Thank you.
Good question. Anyone need a minute? Anyone not get it working? Anyone not see their messages? Okay, moving on. Red light. So I've got all my messages in the console here, and we're on the right track, but something peculiar happens. Watch what happens when I refresh the page. All of my messages show back up. Why is that happening? Well, if we go look at our front end code, in our front end code, this use effect, we said go run whenever the page first loads. When we refresh the page, it is making the API call. The data is properly in the backend because we inserted it right here. So if we manually trigger that load of the page, it is going to go get my messages and make all of that data show up. But when I send a message, I obviously shouldn't have to refresh the whole page to make that sent message show up. So I'm down in my message input. I've got my data. And if I look at my data in the console and hit the send button, I can see my messages are here. It's an array and it's got everything in it. But I'm looking at my message input and all I have access to is the inputted text. I now have the data, but it's stuck down at the message input level. So we need to use props, but we kind of use props in reverse. What do I mean there? Well, if we go to our app.js, this messages is what's controlling our messages list down here. What if we can take this set messages and pass that into message input so that when message input calls set message, it updates these messages and these messages will update the messages list. So we kind of have to send it down in a prop. We use that prop sends it back up to the parent updates the state, sends it back into the sibling, and then the sibling maps over all of that. Okay, that's very complex. Let's break that down in reality. In message input, I'm going to add in my set messages, not my messages itself, just my set messages. Then I'm going to go into my message input and I'm going to add in my set messages as a prop. Once I add that in as a prop, what I can do is when my data comes back from the API, I can set my messages to my data.messages. And I'm also going to set my inputted text back to an empty string. Now, when I come over here and send yet another message, as soon as I hit send, look what happens. It shows up as if I sent that message.
Nice.
Green light. We added in our prop to set the messages. Because we added a prop, we also have to tell our message input it's getting access to a prop called set messages. And once we have access to that prop, we are able to use that prop to update our messages here. Go ahead and vote in the poll when you're good to go. What should be happening is you can type in a message, you can hit the send button, it will instantly show up or almost instantly show up as the message text down here, and it should also clear out your input down here.
Hey, Max.
Yes.
When mine is not full size, my messages are going behind the send button.
That's less than ideal.
Yes.
Hey, look, so are mine. So I think to fix that, red light here because I don't actually know how to fix it, but we're gonna try. We are going to, in our messages list, we're gonna say overflow Y is auto. Oh, excuse me, I clearly said Y. Why did you apply it to both? Bad. Well, that kind of fixed it, but not the way I wanted it to. Um, okay, take that out. Okay. So little CSS to add there. Green light if you would like to do that. It doesn't have anything to do with the div ID. I don't know what's causing the overflow on the X, but if you just say overflow X is hidden because there isn't really anything overflowing there, that will prevent the left-right horizontal scroll bar. And then you can also add in the overflow Y scroll, and that will prevent the things from going behind the send button and make it so that you can scroll up and down. If you take out the X, it will also hold, it won't hide it. It will still make the Y show up.
No, I mean, if you take out the dash X.
Oh, if you take out the dash X, it applies it to both of them.
All right, yeah, okay, thanks.
So we want to scroll on the Y, but hide it on the X, and that gives you a little scroll. Jen, what's up?
Getting an error that says set messages is not a function at send message.
Share screen. Did I freeze for everyone or just Danny? The what I did for that scroll there was just put in this overflow Y and overflow X. Shannon, I can't do everything. I will get to that in 1 second. Okay, Jen, your set messages is not a function, so we got to trace this through, and this is good for everyone to hear debugging wise. If we look up at our app.js, set messages is here. That's the set messages that we're trying to flow through. So we put our set messages here as a prop. Then in our message input, we get access to the set messages. Then we can update that. So if we do hello to and hit send, it puts it in.
I knew I messed this up. Thank you.
Okay,
Yep.
so how do we get it to, do we have to just add padding on the top to get that? Like that first little message to come down?
Yeah, so we can say the row nth child of 1 can have some margin on the top of 10 pixels. And that will move it down for just the first message, but not impact all the rest of them. And then there's also the question that I don't really want to answer, but I guess I have to. When I'm scrolled up to the top and I type something in and hit send, the scroll bar changed. The message is down there, but it's not scrolling down to the bottom. That's not the easiest thing to fix. We could, and I red light on this because I don't know if this is going to work, but we can try and work through it. What I'm tempted to do is say, hey, my messages list has an ID on it of messages list. So knowing how my handy dandy JavaScript works, I could say document get element by ID messages list, and then I can dot scroll into view. I need the last message though to be able to scroll it into view. So instead, what I would have to do is in my in here, I would say something like, give me the message and also give me the index. And then last message is going to equal the index plus 1 is equal to the messages dot length. So what I'm doing is I'm getting access to whatever one we're looping over. Then I'm saying this is last message true or false. It's true if the length is equal to whatever index we're on plus 1, because we zero index on the map. And so we basically just add 1 to it to make it equal the length. Then
Is there a way to do like when a message is sent, it automatically scrolls to the bottom?
that's what we're working on.
Oh, okay.
Then in our sent message, we would have to say the ID on this is going to be if the props dot last message, then put on last message. Otherwise, don't put on anything. And then in the message input, we could get the element by ID last message and scroll that into view. God help me if this works. Scroll up to the top, say new message, hit send. Almost. If we put this on a timeout and say, wait half a second. Nope, half a second. Okay, that was a lot of steps, and I'm not proud of this. And don't think I'm going to greenlight you on this. You don't have to catch up to this if you don't want to, but I do want to go through the steps, and I want to tell you why this is bad. There's actually a better way for us to do it. But what triggered all of this is Shannon said, when I send a new message, if I'm scrolled up to the top, why isn't it scrolling me down to the bottom? Well, we can scroll it down to the bottom. The problem is we need to know what the last message is on the bottom of the screen. Well, sent message doesn't really know how to do that. So here's what we do. We say, hey, in the message list, when we're mapping over everything, instead of just giving me the message, also give me the index of what message we are looping over. Now, if that index plus 1, so if I'm on the first message, it's index 0, but we want to use that as a 1. And so we want to say, okay, first message is really index plus 1, so it's 1. Last message, if there are 5 messages, the last message would be index 4, but we want to add 1 to it. So length is not 0 indexed, but index obviously is 0 indexed. So we say, hey, make a new prop called last message. And if this is the last message, the index plus 1 is going to equal however many messages there are in the length of that array. So this is going to equal true or false. Then in our sent message, we have to say, hey, if there is a prop called last message, throw an ID on this of last message. Otherwise, don't put an ID on it whatsoever. Then, if we go look in our console and select in our last message, you can see the row has an ID of last message on it, because we told it, if there's a prop called last message, put an ID on it of last message. Now that we've done that, we need to say, well, when do we do that? So we go back to our messages, back to our message input, and we say, hey, wait half a second. Why do we have to wait half a second? Because this set messages isn't done yet. Once we set the messages, React takes a couple milliseconds to update those messages and make it show up. Set messages runs asynchronously, and we can't fix that by just putting the await keyword in it. So instead, what we do is we say, wait half a second. That's basically what set timeout does. It says, run this code in 500 milliseconds or half a second. Then go get the element by ID last message. Well, what's last message? We just put that on right here. Now that you've found that ID, go scroll that into view. That fixes it, but here's the red flag. We shouldn't ever be using document, because we are bypassing React. React has something called the virtual DOM. That's what makes maps work so quickly. That's what makes our interface update. That's what allows us to do routing quicker. Basically, whenever we see document.anything in our React code, there's a more React-y way of writing that code in order to make that work. What we should be doing here is something called a use ref, which is like a hook, like use state or use effect. We basically can attach a reference to that last message, then be able to use that reference somewhere else in our code. That's kind of taking the train too far off the tracks. So we aren't going to dive into the example of how to use a ref, but I will say what we could do is say, this is bad React code because it is using the browser's DOM instead of the virtual one. Then we use this as a learning opportunity. Oftentimes we will see something in our code that says to do. And to-dos are so common that text editors now have started to highlight them and make sure that they are clear, hey, this is an action item that I need to come back to. So oftentimes inline comments, the computer doesn't care, but sometimes as developers, we follow a syntax. So we can throw a to-do in here that says refactor this to use a use ref hook instead of document. But you will get a ton of shit if all you do is put to-dos in your code and never come back to them. So to give yourself a little reminder, or to make sure that if you're working on a team, you know not only who wrote this, but how long ago did they write it, it is often common to put in your initials and today's date. I am not kidding you. I have found to-dos that are not from this millennium. I have found to-dos that are from the 90s. Very scary to think about. You do want to go back and refactor your to-dos. But if you are like, hey, this works for now, I should go back, I should think about it down the road, just make sure that you're putting in your initials or your name, and also putting in some kind of date. Oftentimes we can find that information in Git anyway. But if you are cursing someone to shitty code, you should take credit to placing said curse. Ali, this is it's a good question. Ali asks, is this how we do like real-time messaging? Real-time messaging certainly would use a database. and it would store all of your messages in that database. It would use a technology called sockets instead of what we call a REST call. So the REST call right now is able to make it so if there are any new messages that show up in the database, when I send a message, whatever new messages are in the database would also show up. The problem with REST is it's only one way. So we can ask the server, hey, are there any new messages? And the server can say, sure, here are the messages. But if someone else sends a message, there's no way for the server to tell us as the receiving person of that message, hey, there is a new message available. So REST is always one way. We have to make the request comes back with a response, and we can deal with the response. But there's no way on the server to generate a response without the request coming in first. So the internet over time has switched to a newer web infrastructure called sockets, and the sockets open a connection. And that connection stays open for as long as you've got that browser tab open. That allows for true real-time communication, but sockets add in some additional complexity. So we don't cover it yet because the vast majority of APIs are still REST-based. But WebSockets and GraphQL are two newer technologies coming down the pipeline that you may get exposure to if you do a full stack web development job. Shakota, you can put these changes in if you want. The only thing that this is doing is making it so when it reaches the bottom of the screen and you send a message, it automatically scrolls you down to the bottom. But it's totally fine to leave that out if you want, just because we did it in a couple different files. Okay, how are we feeling?
I'm still thinking about the scroll bar. I'm not gonna lie to you. I just was wondering, like, you know how when you were scrolling, it still was going past that like threshold into the send button?
Nope. New message for real is down at the bottom.
Well, yes, I know you fixed it, but if I'm wrong, I'm sure you didn't. Okay. But could we do like, could we actually make the scroll bar like some type of like callback event to where like, you know how you have the scroll top, you have the bottom, to where like in the event that we're like scrolling, like it can do the difference of like the height of the scroll versus the scroll top and only move it that amount? Or
So yeah, if I'm stuck in the middle of the page here, right, and I've got room to scroll at the top and bottom, and I send a message at 6:31 p.m. and hit send, it's going to scroll me down to the bottom.
not exactly what I was thinking. It's okay. Yeah, it's okay.
So we want to think about what, before we can code anything, we've got to be able to articulate the objective, right? And so what was happening before we had this code working was if we were looking at our messages and we're scrolling up and we're like, wait, what did this person say, right? And we send a new message at 6:32, we want to be able to say, hey, when I hit the send button, that new message should scroll me down to the bottom, right? And if we think about this on our phones, if we scrolled up on our phones, no matter how much we scroll up, when we send that message, it's going to scroll us down to the bottom, right? So that's what we want to identify. So there are two ways of thinking about that. We can say, well, I just put that new message in there, scroll me down to that message so I can see it. Or you could think about it as saying, well, I could get the height of this input, and once I get the height of the input, or the height of this div, I could then set the scroll bar down to the bottom. In this case, they're achieving the exact same thing. They're different ways of saying the same objective. One is saying, I send a new message, put me down to the bottom. The other one is saying, when a new message is sent, figure out the height of that entire div, then set the scroll bar down to that height. Either approach would work, but they're accomplishing that same objective, right? Of saying, hey, new message, doesn't matter where you're scrolled into, just scroll me so that I can see that new message that got sent. So is there something, Rain, that you're trying to get this to do that it is not currently doing?
Yeah, it was, I mean, thank you for the explanation. I was trying something different. This one was scrolling, the thumb should move in proportion to our scrolling. I was trying to see if I can input some type of like use callback to try to utilize what you taught us, and that is called on the scroll event, where like we take the proportion of how far the content has been scrolled from the scroll top, utilizing that to scrollable area using scroll height, then multiply by the track's height to get a new position. So I was trying something different. I don't want to give anything. I'm sorry.
So you can definitely use those events, and in React, you could use them as hooks. In this case, we don't need them, but if you needed to keep track of something like, hey, how far did they scroll? Or you could implement something using scroll height to say like, if they haven't scrolled in more than 5 minutes, we want to reset them back down to the bottom message. So you definitely could do that. But it just depends on, having that objective first, because there are probably over 1,000 DOM properties, and probably close to 100 DOM events, right? And so being able to say like, okay, what are we trying to do there? What we could do for something like that is say, hey, maybe we want a button at the bottom that says scroll to the last received message. Well, we could do that, and we could use scroll height for that, or we could use that scroll into view. But it just depends on like what that objective is. In this case, what Shannon asked was, well, when I send a new message, I expect it to scroll me to the bottom. That's something that we can implement, but we definitely don't want to just go into all the different DOM properties and try and use them without that objective in mind first.
Thank you.
Palash said, can we connect our Postgres databases together with each other so you can kind of chat with each other? You could if you deployed it. And so that's what Nathan's coming back in a little over 2 weeks to show you is, hey, I want to have my front end where like right now you can go to your portfolio and see your portfolio sites. You also need to know though how to deploy it to the back end, how to have your Postgres server running up in AWS and have your backend server running in AWS. Once you do those 2 steps, yes, it is possible for everyone to go to one front end URL. That front end URL is going to use a publicly accessible URL in the back end. And then whoever has that front end open and sends a message would be able to see that traffic sent back and forth. Historically, we have tried to do that in real time in a class using a tunnel service called ngrok, N-G-R-O-K. And what ngrok does is it opens a tunnel from your local computer out onto the public internet. And it does that securely, but there is a limit to how many connections it will tunnel into your computer. So historically, we have started getting 500 error messages and rate limits and all of that stuff when I open up my 3010 port and say, hey, everyone, go use my chat app. Well, everyone in class tries to connect to it at the same time. And ngrok is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. A couple connections are fine, but 20 connections all at once, that's like a production flow. We shouldn't be doing that. So it is possible to set up a tunnel, but the better way of doing it will be deploying it. And you guys will be learning that in a couple weeks.
Do we like deploy it to GitHub, the backend too?
No, so GitHub doesn't run backend servers. You will be deploying it to AWS, Amazon Web Services, both your database and your node server.
Oh, gotcha. Thanks.
And if you're really chomping at the bit, there's something called fly.io that is really cool and does really easy deploys. But don't worry, that is coming. AWS is coming down the curriculum pipeline. Okay, I think we should get one more flow working. I want two things. One, I want timestamps to show up on these messages. And the second thing is I would like a little delete button to show up because we've sent all of these messages and I would like to delete them. Well, hypothetically, red light, don't follow me yet. I could go in Beekeeper, and Beekeeper needs a refresh as well. So as soon as I hit refresh here are all gazillion of the messages that I've sent in. Well, I can right click and hit delete row on one of these and apply, and that will get rid of it, right? So new message for real. If I delete it, I hit apply, I come over to my front end, I refresh it, it's gone from here. But what that isn't doing is giving the end user the ability to delete those messages. So that's what we're going to dive in to do. I am going to go to my sent message. And in my sent message, I am going to add in another div. And in that div, I'm going to put in a span with a style of, let's say, color is going to be red. And we're going to say delete. And I'm going to save that, and I'm going to come over here, and my delete shows up, but it's huge. So I'm going to say, hey, the style of everything in this div is going to be a font size of 10, 12, and we'll throw some padding on the top of it of 5 pixels. And all right, I'm liking that. Now I am also, yes, red light alley, don't follow yet. I will also throw a cursor on this of pointer so people know they can click on it. That makes it so it's not a just a regular mouse pointer. It gives you the little Mickey Mouse hand. Okay, then I'm going to say on click, delete message. And I am going to say const delete message is going to window if window dot confirm. Are you sure you want to delete this message? I am going to const response my await a fetch to my backend that needs to do a couple things. It needs a method of delete. I have to throw my async in here because I use my await, so I need my async spelled properly. And I am going to tell it to go to my message. And that should be good so far. So I come over here. I can click my delete. It will say, are you sure you want to delete this message? If I hit OK, I get in my console a 404 not found delete. That's okay. We'll take care of that in a second. Green light. Everything we have done is in sent message so far. Starting the poll for when you are caught up. Allie, when you say move back a row, you mean make it not show up in the front end anymore? Or did you mean a column instead of a row?
Like, so you know how there's that space now from where we deleted the message?
No.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Okay, I was looking at this wrong. Wait, so when we delete one, do they all just pop back together?
Yep.
Oh, okay, never mind. I was looking at the wrong thing.
We will need to update the state to make it delete once we make it delete in the database, but we'll get there in 1 second.
Is it actually coming off of the local host when you delete it?
No, not yet. Right now in the browser, in the console, it will show a 404 because it doesn't know how to delete on the back end.
All right.
I was trying to not make your red light be too far behind. Yes, Allie, we haven't done received. I will say that a lot of students after graduation or once this project is done, will go back in and add like a little toggle to make it so that they can type in a message and hit send and have it show up on the received side instead of the sent side. You could also make it so that like after a couple second delay, a message pops up that says like computer response to your message or something like that. I think I saw someone do like a random quote generator. So whenever you sent a message, the computer responded with a random quote. That's kind of a cool one to do. Just a couple things for you to think about there.
Okay, I have a question that's kind of like off topic. So like,
Shannon,
how
you
do
are
you-
supposed to get that in red. Sorry, go ahead, Allie.
no, I'm sorry. Look, like I'm just I'm just talking about nonsense. But I wanted to know, like, so how do people do like when Google has like that little dinosaur game like in their webpage?
Mhm.
Who does like the development for the game itself? Like, is that a whole nother thing outside of what we're doing, or like is that incorporated in the full stack?
Yeah, well, it is. So if it's being done in the browser, it has to be 99% of the time. If it's interactive and in the browser, it's done in JavaScript. So most games, when you think of like Call of Duty or like, you know, big, super large video games, there are artists, as many artists involved as there are programmers. Then there are the people who are making the game engines that make the programmers and the artists be able to kind of meet in the middle there, right? And so for like the little dinosaur game on Google, they probably didn't actually have an artist, or if they did, they just like put a couple PNGs together and said, here you go, right? For a massive game platform, you're going to need the artists, you're going to need the developers who are doing the logic. You're also going to need the brainiacs who are like figuring out the physics of how a bullet gets shot and how the blood explodes and all of that kind of stuff, right? And how a player moves. And then you will also need full stack developers because, okay, how does that, now that that data is generated, how do we keep track of scoreboards? How do we store that user's information? How do we know where they are in the map? How do we convey where they are in the map to everyone else who is playing that same exact map at that same exact time? So in terms of video game development, it isn't a web full stack developer, but there would definitely need to be full stack developers involved there, keeping track of the database and the graphics engine and all of that stuff. Okay, everyone good? Anyone need a minute? Bullshit, delete isn't a valid HTTP method. We're going to do the next step, and if you still have that error, which I'm afraid you're going to, let me know. Everyone else good? Delete actually might not be a listed HTTP method, but so many people use it that I have no guilt using it myself. But we're gonna do the next step, and then if you're still having an issue, let me know. Okay. Anyone need one more minute? All right. Red light. So we did our delete over here. We now need to come over here and do our server.delete over here. And I'm still going to delete a message. And I'm going to do my async. I'm going to say await a DB query. That is going to delete from messages. And then I'm like, all right, what did we learn about delete from? We never want to write a delete from without a where, because if we don't specify the where, it's going to delete every single row in the table. Like, no, don't want to do that. So I am going to do my delete from messages where what? What message do I want to delete? I want to delete whatever message I click the little delete button on. But does that little delete button know what it's trying to delete? Let's go look. In our sent message in our messages list is giving access to the content of the message, but it needs access to the ID of the message as well. We can't use key because key is reserved for React. React gets really feisty with it when we try and use the key. So instead, we pass in the message ID. Now that we've done that, and I'm going to leave this at the bottom of my screen because this is probably the step that you will all forget when I do give you a green light. Don't forget that step. I can now access that ID in my props. But this seems a little overkill for JSON, doesn't it? To have to put the headers in, to have to put my body in, to have to stringify it, all to say, hey, the ID I want to delete is this number. That seems like overkill for me. So instead, we're going to use a route parameter. We're going to put in a slash here and pass in the props.id. Now that I put those props in, I need to tell my backend, heads up, you're going to get a message ID in here. And we put that colon in to tell it, no, you're not actually looking for the letters message ID. You're going to get a number in as a route parameter. And we are going to use that. I'm going to convert that to a template literal and say delete where the ID equals my rec.params.message ID. Then we always need to res.send something back. This case, we're not going to send anything. Green light coming in 1 second. Here's how it should all work. If I delete a message here, Oop, I forgot my rec res. Try that again. If I delete my ABC message and hit OK, it doesn't appear anything happened. But if I hit my refresh button, you will see my ABC is gone. So green light, we added in our ID message ID inside message list. We set up our delete message in here to do our fetch request. We put in our props.id so it knows what message to delete. And then we wrote our delete function over here to put in the rec params message ID and just res.send something back.
Max, you gave us a quick definition for async last night. Can you repeat that, please?
Async is any code that is running in the background. We have two options to deal with any of that async code. One is to use .then syntax with promises and chain it with .then with callbacks. The other option is to use the async keyword, which we have to define on whatever function we're using. And then we can use the await keyword to basically make our command not run asynchronously, to basically say, wait for this command to finish running, and then treat it as if it were running synchronously.
Okay, and that's for API calls, timeouts, and promises.
Not timeouts. Timeouts use callbacks, but they don't use async await. But promises, an alternative to using the .then syntax with promises is to use async await. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And again, a reminder that when you delete your message, it won't delete over here until you hit the refresh button, and then it will make it disappear. We updated our server.js, Shannon, and our sent message and our messages list. So we put in our props ID here, and we also put in our ID message.id in our messages list. And then finally, we wrote our new endpoint for our server.delete. Did I restart the poll, or is that for this one? I can't remember. I didn't restart it. He has 2 more minutes because there's one last thing I want to do before break. Want to get our messages refreshing. I think we're almost there. Just give you 1 more minute, and then we will do our last step. Use this time to take some notes if you need to review what we've done so far, because we've done a lot. Okay, last thing we're going to do before break. We've already seen how we can res.send back our results, but then I need to do yet another select query. I need to put it down here. I need to res send it. Our front end already knows how to get new messages. Why should we have to keep on repeating ourselves on that code? Well, we can solve that in the back end by creating a function that would select all the messages and send it back. Or we could also solve that in the front end. So I'm going to go to my app.js, and I'm going to take my entire make API call and move it outside of my use effect. Because I'm moving it outside of my use effect, I can actually pass this around as a prop. In order to do that, I'm going to say something like update messages equals my make API call. Again, I have to move my make API call outside of my use effect so that it knows where to do that. Then I'm going to go to my messages list. I'm going to tell my messages list, you're going to get a prop called update messages. And what are you going to do with it? You're going to send those update messages straight through to your sent message. Then finally, we're going to go to our sent message. And now that we've awaited our fetch, we can call our props.update messages. And if everything works the way it should, when we delete a message and hit OK, it will remove it from the list. Okay, so 3 files that we updated there right before break. App.js, we took our make API call and we moved it outside of our use effect. Green light on this, by the way. Once we move it outside of the use effect, we are able to take that make API call, what we have defined up here, and pass it down to our messages list as a prop. Once we do that, in our messages list, we pass in that prop name up here, update messages, and we take our update messages down here and pass it down into our sent message as another prop. Finally, down in our sent message, we are able to put in our props.update messages. 3 files, app.js, messages list, sent message. Once you get those 3 done, you are good to go on break. Be back at 7:25. I will stick around for a couple minutes.
Max, I do have like a warning in my front end.
That says,
It says line 419 responses assigned a value but never used.
I
was
you
trying
can
to
fix that by deleting your const response in your sent message, and that will make the warning go away.
Okay, thank you.
I had that as well. That wasn't on you, by the way.
Hey, Max, I'm on the
Yep.
previous step and it's given me an error like fail to fetch.
Share your screen.
I haven't carried out any of these steps, the ones that we just did.
That's fine. You still shouldn't be getting a failed to fetch. Okay, so whenever we get a failed to fetch, it's usually because our backend server is offline. So we're gonna pop back over to that's mine. This is yours, and you're getting an app crashed on error missing column. So that is usually content.
Oh, maybe I think I didn't add ID to it. I was supposed to add ID to pass it on, right? Or did I?
Let me look at your beekeeper. No, you've got your ID there. Then on your sent message, you're passing in your props ID, coming through your props.
Yeah.
Coming from your, just close that for now, messages list. Here you go.
Yeah, I didn't have ID. Yeah, gotcha.
So now if we, because you crashed your backend though, we have to control, oh, no, it's mine. We have to, in here, control C to stop it, and then up enter to restart it. And now that it's restarted, we can refresh, we can delete out your hey, we can hit OK, we can refresh, your hey is gone. So you're good to do the last of the steps now.
Thank you.
Yep.
I have one more question, but it's unrelated. So
Sure.
it's also like about deploying my one of the React projects to GitHub again, and
Okay.
I plan it with some other project, but it won't do it. It would be like, it would get to the step like GH pages build, and then the terminal would stop. Like it won't do anything for like hours. I left it for hours and it didn't do that.
Schedule another one-on-one with me and we'll take a look at it.
I deleted the cache and everything, but it still won't work.
It's
The .cache folder in node modules, I mean.
it's probably that there's something with the Git repo that isn't configured right.
Okay,
But yeah, schedule a one-on-one with me and we can go through it.
thank you.
It's very, very fickle to get GH pages to work. It's not you. It should be easier than it is.
Right. Thank you.
All right, so you guys have to break 7:25. Where we're at in our application, right? We got our delete working down the road. We could make our edit work. Last thing I want to do is open it up to timestamp. And then we are going to open it up to you guys and see, hey, I've got this idea. How would we go about implementing that? So start dreaming up some ideas that we can implement in the last 30 minutes of class, and we can dive into that. For now, what we're going to do is we're going to get a timestamp to show up the way that we want it to. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And what I've noticed is, hey, wouldn't it be cool if next to this delete word, it would show us the time of whatever the message was sent? Well, the problem that we run into is in our beekeeper, we've got ID, content, and sent. We don't have a timestamp. Well, there's no way of magically waving a wand and making that timestamp data show up. But moving forward, we can make that time actually work for us, right? So what we could do is we could, red light, don't follow yet. We could write an alter table command and say alter table messages. And then we would put in name of the column, and we could do all of that. Or we can actually use a cool feature of Beekeeper. If I'm in my messages table, check out what's hiding down here under structure. If I click on structure, it gives me a breakdown of my current table. And what I'm able to do is hit the little plus button here. And for my name of the column, I'm going to call it timestamp. For the type of the column, I'm also going to use timestamp. And then finally, for the default value, I'm going to set that to current timestamp. Green light, you can follow those steps, just a couple of them. Open Beekeeper, open the messages table, click on structure down in the bottom left, hit the plus button in the top right, make your row look like my row. Once you have made your row look like my row, you can go ahead and hit the apply button. And that will put in the column that we need. Timestamp, if you're putting yours in, don't put this parenthesis 6 in, that will get added automatically for you. And then the default value we're going to set to current timestamp. Hit the apply button down at the bottom to make your row turn from green to gray, and then you are good to go. Now, if we go back to our messages table and refresh, we will see that there is a timestamp in here, and the timestamp on each one of these messages is whatever time we hit that apply button, right? Like I said, there's no way to retroactively go back and know what that time is. But if we add in some new message, like sent after the break, and we say we sent that true, even if we leave this empty and hit apply, because we set that default up, you will see that it went in at 1929. Well, 1929 is military time for 7:29 p.m. current Eastern Standard Time. Man, I'd really be fucking with you if I were still out in California. Okay, so now that we've got that timestamp in, we got to use it. Well, let's think about our whole flow backward. Allie, you're going to go to structure, hit the plus button up at the top, type in timestamp. The type is going to be timestamp, leave out the parentheses 6, and then the default value is going to be current timestamp. Do that all in caps. I don't know if it matters or not, but just play it safe. And then hit the apply button down at the bottom, and that's going to add in the column for you. That is basically writing the alter table SQL command, so we don't have to. Okay, now we go in and we're looking at our messages, and we already thought ahead here. We were like, select all the columns. We don't care what you're selecting, just go get all of them. That timestamp data is actually already getting sent into us. So if we go to our front end and look at our messages list, we are sending in the content and the ID, but we aren't sending in the timestamp from our message. So we need to do that as well. And red light on this. Sorry, it was indecisive there. Red light on this. So we add in our timestamp, we get our timestamp and our props, and we should just be able to make that show up, right? So I'm going to throw a span in here, and I'm going to say props.timestamp. And I take a look at, oops, message.timestamp. I take a look at that, and it's a timestamp, but man, is it an ugly timestamp. This isn't necessarily what I want to display to the end user now, is it? Well, what we can do is use toLocaleString. Plus, you were a step ahead. We need to throw this in a new date. The date is going to convert this timestamp, which is a string coming from the database, into a JavaScript date that has all kinds of cool functions built into it. And then we are going to dot toLocale string. Save that, come over here, and now we will get our lovely date and time showing up. Can do a little bit more formatting there. We might want to throw in like a space with a bar and another space between it. And that will separate out our delete button a little bit from our timestamp. And we are good to go there. Green light. In messages list, we have to add our timestamp message timestamp. We do not have to modify anything on the back end other than the column that we added into the database from the last red light, green light. But in our sent message, we are able to put in a new span here that shows the current time. toLocaleString, Shannon, is a function that is built into JavaScript, into all JavaScript dates, that allows it to format it in a string that is to the locale that you are in. So in the UK, it would have the day first, then the month first, or then the month, and then the year, because that would make sense. The smallest, the medium, and then the largest. But no, sorry, US things just make more sense. The new date is basically taking this as a string out of the database, because again, we can't send complex data types over the internet. So we send it as a string. That string comes in, converts it into a JavaScript date, and then the JavaScript date allows us to do all kinds of stuff on it. So if you didn't want the date and the time, and you only wanted the time to show up, you could actually say toLocaleTime string, because that's a built-in function, and you would see we would just get the times. And then there are all kinds of cool things that you can do with this as well. If you head into the documentation, one is if you pass null and then you say hour, I actually just learned this today, 2-digit and minute. 2-digit? Nope. I have to look that up. To locale, time, string, minute, and hour. Thank you, Stack Overflow. Null, hour, minute. Okay. Navigator.language. Two-digit out of range. Hour. I do. Oh, is it the number 2? There we go. So that gets rid of the little second area. Notice I had to Google that. Nothing wrong with that. Stack Overflow, not always the best source of information, but it is okay to lean on that if it works and you understand what they're telling you to do, right? So in this situation, they're telling you, hey, the first prop is whatever language you want to format it into. So if for whatever reason you wanted to format this into a Japanese date format, you have the option of doing that. And then down here, this is additional options to configure how that time string is coming out. So to locale time string, just something built into the JavaScript format. If you just say to locale string, it will give you both the date and the time, and then you are able to use additional parameters there to adjust that. Should quote, I only added the index to message list. I added that a couple steps ago to get the scrolling to work. So if you skip the scrolling step, you probably don't need the index. Refresh, thanks. Mel, thank you for posting that. No idea what the Japanese format is. I was just guessing that it's different from the rest of the world, but and oddly, I hate to do this, but if you say JS date format by locale, they will give you a breakdown on this page of options, specifications, national date format. Somewhere in this documentation, it will actually give you a breakdown of that, and using locales argument. So English US, English Great Britain, Korean, Arabic dates are different. So in Korean, they do the year, a period, the month period, and then a day period. It was not crazy. The Japanese date format is for 2012 was the year 24 of the, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. So there are all kinds of weird date formats. There's actually a great Tom Scott video on how time math is something that you think the computer would be really good at and ends up being like a multi-thousand line program in order to get dates to work correctly. But I will post that video separately, and that's a different tangent. Okay, I am going to save a couple minutes for the end of class to go through and put comments in all of this code to make sure that we are understanding this flow. This is your time to go through, read through any of this code, figure out if you understand it, figure out what you don't understand, and if you want to see how we would implement something in particular in this code, go ahead and raise your hand or throw a suggestion in the chat. I've got more stuff I can fill time with. We can make the update button work. We could make it set up so there's some Amberlyn. Go for it.
I think I'm missed a step. So I don't have anything in my browser. Something with the content. And I checked 3 million times to make sure I spelled it right.
Share screen.
Okay.
All right, cannot read properties of undefined reading content. And of course, why would it give us an error message or a line number that was helpful? Okay, so we are going to, first of all, these are good debugging steps for everyone to hear. Make sure our server's online. If our server's not online and that crash, that can cause some weird errors sometimes. Your server's online, that's not a problem. Then we are going to go look at
It's behind.
here. Yep. Okay, so in here, we've got our messages list that's trickling everything down. In our messages list, we are passing down the content with the message.content. And then in the here, we're sending down the entire message. Okay. But this is taking care of returning the sent and the received. So we don't need these anymore, which were left over from when we were just setting up our components and making them show up. So if we delete those, you
Oh my
are
gosh.
mostly back in business.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. You want to see how we do an update? Okay. Very similar to how we do a delete. So in our messages list, in our sent message, and by the way, you could definitely add this to received message if you want, but in our sent message, because we've already got our delete button set up, we might as well use that as well. So I'm going to throw another span in here that says edit, and we'll throw this funky syntax in here to make sure that our spaces show up. So our edit button shows up. I'm going to take our style and our on click, throw that on the span as well. And this is totally optional, by the way. So if you want to follow along with this, you can. At this point in the evening, I'm going to recommend that you just go on for the ride as opposed to trying to make it work in your own, because all of this code is going to be up on GitHub. Feel free to interrupt me if you have a question. Change this to edit message. I will take the color red out of this one. Then it's going to be mad at me because I haven't defined what edit message does. So I'm going to say const edit message. And we know it's going to need to do some API bullshit. So we're going to send in the async. Then we are going to say const updated text is equal to a window.confirm. You may have noticed, I'm sorry, window.prompt. Whoa. Window.prompt. You may have noticed I used a sneaky window.confirm. Turns out the browser has all kinds of these little actions built into it. You have seen alert before, except you've probably seen it as just alert, not window.alert. It turns out that there are other types of alerts built in, like confirm, which gives you the yes or no, and the prompt, which is actually going to have the user go type that thing in. So there are better user experiences that you can build from scratch. But when you just really need a quick OK or cancel button, window.confirm is really, really powerful. So is this .prompt. So I'm going to say, what would you like to change the message content to? And just to make sure this is working, because I am not writing code that I am guaranteed is going to work, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to hit the edit button. I'm going to type in new content and hit OK. And I'm going to make sure my new content comes out of my console. Now that it's out of the console and I know that that's properly in my updated text, I can do my same API call and update my messages, except this time I don't want to do a delete. I want to do a patch, a put. They're not used interchangeably. It doesn't really matter because you're controlling what it does on the back end, but put and patch are used very similarly. Notice I took my props.id here. We already did all of that work to know what message we were clicking the edit button on. That was already sent down through the prop. So I can use the same props here for the delete that I can for the put to update it. And I can also use that props update messages as well, which is kind of handy. So now the only thing that I can't do is I need to send it the updated text as well. And I don't really want to put that in a route param, and a get parameter would also be messy because it's going to be like a string of text, right? So in this case, it's going to be better to throw in my headers with a content type of application JSON and a body of a JSON.stringify, and I'm going to send in my updated text there. Now, front end is done. Got to go do it on the back end. So I am going to server.put my /message/message ID. I'm going to do my async rec_res. I'm going to await a DB query that is going to update my messages. And nope, can't do that from memory. Update SQL query W3 schools. Oh, there it is. Update messages, set the content equal to, and I'm going to change this over to a template literal so I can use my backticks and my $ curly braces. And I'm going to set my content to my rec.body dot. I got to switch to my front end and remember, okay, I called it updated text. So I'm going to say that. And then be very, very careful here. If I do this without a where, it is going to update every single message in my database with that updated text. So make sure you are, whenever you do an update, whenever you do a delete, that you've got a where in there and that is working the way that you want it to. So I'm going to move this down onto multiple lines so I can keep track of all of it. I'm going to say where the ID is equal to the rec.params.message ID. Man, wouldn't it be great if there was some way that we could run this all as a JavaScript command and not have to write some SQL? Spoiler alert, that's coming on Monday. Okay. So I got my update messages. I get my set content in. I make sure my quotes are in the right spot. I've got my where all lined up. You know what? Doing an update, nervous about the where working. I'm going to show you a trick. I'm going to take this whole template literal and I'm going to comment out those lines. And all I'm going to do is console log out that query. Now I'm going to come over here. I'm going to edit my second test and call it third test. And nothing happens, but look at what came out of my console. Update messages, set content to third test where ID equals 5. That's my SQL. That's my SQL that's getting generated. So I can copy this, go into my beekeeper, go into a query, paste it, and hit run. And I get one row affected. And so now if I go back to my messages and refresh it, we can see my second test became third test. So I know that that SQL is good to go now. I'm trusting that. So I can come back here, delete out or comment out my console log, put the query back in, and then finally, whenever we have a request, we always need to res.send something back. So I'm going to res.send, and in this case, we don't need to send anything back. The front end is going to take care of getting that message and showing that it's updated. So I save that. I refresh here. I am going to grab one of these test messages, and I am going to say, I want to change the content to some other text and hit OK. And down at the bottom, my some other text changes. No one's going to ask me the question. Okay.
Why did it drop down to the bottom?
There's the question. It dropped down to the bottom because of the timestamp. So when we use the timestamp data format in Postgres, whenever we update any of the data on this row, it is going to update it to whatever thing that we put in there. Don't know actually if this will fix it, but we can try it. If we put it in as I have to look up Postgres date time. There is timestamp date, but date doesn't have time. Then there's time, but it doesn't have date. So all right, so maybe what we have to do instead. Oh, I don't like this. Let's think about this. We can try and do it. Actually, in a SQL update query, how can we update a row without impacting the default timestamp? You should exclude the timestamp column from your update statement. This way, the default value for the timestamp column will be used for the update and the existing timestamp won't change. Timestamp, default current timestamp, name, timestamp column, set. Okay. This is intentional. We asked OpenAI a question, and the answer that they gave us is they said, oh, all we need to do is put our update query and leave out the timestamp column. As a result, it won't get changed. But look at what we did. Do you see us using timestamp anywhere? This is a cautionary tale for OpenAI and ChatGPT. It gave us an answer that made total sense, but it wasn't the right answer. So you have to be careful there because ChatGPT does not know that it's wrong. It is not intentionally misleading us. It gave us an answer, but that answer is exactly what we did, and it is updating the timestamp. So we have to be careful there. I think what we are going to have to do, and I don't know if this is the right answer or not, but we can try it. What we can try and do is say, hey, go in addition to sending in the updated text, we are also going to send in the timestamp, which is going to come. Oh, I don't like that solution either. Oh, fine, I'll do it this way. All right. Const current message is going to await a DB query. That's going to select star from messages where, and one of these days I will learn to just use a template literal. The ID is equal to whatever our rec.params.message ID is. Then we are going to log out the current messages.rows and make sure we got that data back. So I'm going to edit this one. I'm going to say A. And here is the data before we edit it in the database. So now if we say update messages, set content, and then we put in a comma and we say, and set the timestamp equal to whatever the current messages dot rows, go grab the first result from that and use that timestamp. Let's give that a try. What we're basically doing is saying, go into the database, go find a message, the message that we're editing, go extract out the timestamp from it and use the already existing timestamp, but update it to the new content. No idea if this is going to work. Let's give it a try. 7:28 was when this last message was edited. Oh. I may have just gone down a giant rabbit hole. Find out in a minute. I'm going to edit this content to B and hit OK. And it failed to fetch because it doesn't like the date. The date is, I hate everything. I think I know what I did wrong. Let's put this in quotes. Okay. Hold that thought for a second. I'm going to comment everything out that we just did. I'm going to take out that timestamp. I'm going to save it here. I'm going to refresh everything here. Back to the way it was. Notice this timestamp is 7:28. I'm going to change this to B. Come on, I took that out. Rush, save, edit, B, okay. Oh, extra comma. Okay, try that again. B, okay. Notice what just happened there. Our content updated. Look at what stayed the same. The timestamp. So it turns out ChatGPT was right. It isn't updating the timestamp. And to go confirm that, I'm going to go to Beekeeper. I'm going to go look at my messages and I'm going to refresh. Here's my B message. It's still set to 7:30. Thanks, Brandy. Totally kidding. The problem there is not our timestamp. The problem is that SQL does not guarantee the order in which our results will come back. Unless we go and in our select query up here where we get all the messages, we tell it to order by ID. Now, because we explicitly told it, you have to order these results by the ID. Sequentially, the IDs will always be in order, no matter what order they get created in. It's a serial ID number, right? They're always going to be sorted by that. So by just putting this order by ID in, wherever we do a select, when we refresh and pick our 631 and update it to 731 and hit OK, it will keep it in the right spot. So that is a good lesson to learn for your capstones. If order matters to you and you want to sort it in the order that it was created, make sure you use an order by ID. Don't be tempted by that timestamp. The timestamp actually wasn't updating. Timestamp was fine. It was that order by clause that we had to add on there. So I'm going to go take all of my timestamp code out because I'm ashamed that we went down a rabbit hole, even though it wasn't the right answer. Just kidding, that happens. And as junior developers and even as senior developers, sometimes we have to delete days, hours, sometimes even weeks of code because it was not the right answer, or it wasn't accomplishing what we wanted it to. Okay, that means our update is now working and that we can just change this to something like third test for reals and hit OK, and it will update the way that we want and not change the order of all of our items. Other ideas? You don't have any other ideas? I'm about to do something very cool.
This isn't an idea, but and it's something small, but I'm just kind of wondering that every time I put parentheses around like my return in my else statement under like message list, it keeps deleting it when it saves. And I'm just not sure why. I mean, it's probably nothing, but everything's fine. But I'm just
These parentheses are optional in React because you can only return one div out of React anyway, or one element out of React. These parentheses are something that Prettier sometimes injects, and it depends on how far indented in the items go. So if you're just returning something on this line that's like
it's like right down there, like where your else statement is, that's where it keeps. So like my brackets look a different color than your brackets, but I mean, I put them in there and then I went back and I saw they were gone. So I put them back again, then they went away again. And I was just like, that's different.
Oh, so you're saying it isn't these outer parentheses, it's parentheses in here?
Yeah, it's the one, right? Specifically the one after the else statement, the return, that yellow parenthesis before your received message.
Oh, okay. So
yeah, it's just deleting those.
This is it will only put in the parentheses if your received message can't fit on the same line as the return. So if your return and the received message can all fit on one line, it won't put in the parentheses. But if your received message is spanning across multiple lines, that's when they put in the parentheses. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, because it is on the same line as the return.
Yep.
So if I put it in there and I move the receive to the next line, it'll just Prettier is just moving it back up to the line and removing the parentheses.
Because it thinks it can fit it all on one. But if you added in some other prop there, like you added in like test equals curly brace true, that would probably be enough to push it down onto the next line and put in the parentheses.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so couple ideas. We could do adding reactions. Shannon had a good one for the timestamps for the received messages. We see, and this is a really good one, for messages list, look at all of the props that we ended up having to send down into sent message. Well, content is based off of message, ID is based off of message, and timestamp is based off of message. Well, if we had just sent in the entire message like we did on the received message, we would be able to convert 3 of those props down to just 1. So oftentimes it is better to send the entire object down into the component and get access to all of those properties the way that we do it here than it is compared to if we send each one down as an individual prop. What do I mean by that? In our received message, we are getting the entire message down here. That means that we can actually go to our sent message and go borrow all of our timestamp code, go back to our received message and paste in here that same code. Except instead of going to props.timestamp, I already have access to my message, so I'm just going to change it to that. Now, when I save and come over here, just like that, I've got my timestamps showing up on those messages. So this is a good example. When you send in all of the data, this message is an object. What does this message look like? I can throw a console log in here for my message and see my message is coming in as my ID, my content, my sent, and my timestamp. Now, I don't need all of that data, but if I send it all in as one prop, I'm able to pull that data out as I need it instead of having to continually add more props. So here's what we're going to do for the rest of the class. I don't know, we could do reactions, we could do replies. Those are totally fair features to add. You could also start thinking about this as how could we use a relational database to relate messages to the sender? How could we build out this application to have a list of everyone we've gotten messages from? And when you click on one of those items, you get those details. We are going to see how to accomplish that next week in the either the blog or the library project. I think we'll do blog. Anyway, that's coming up down the road. We're also going to learn the ORM down the road. What we're going to do now, we're going to document our first API call. How does the data flow when the application first opens? Then, as practice, you guys are going to document either the delete or the update flow on your own. A reminder to turn in your homework. Only half of you have turned it in. I will not call you out by name, but I will shame you if you have not turned it in, not individually, just as a group. Make sure you turn that in. That is the documentation of getting all of those steps done. I've not graded them yet. I've just seen that a couple people have them missing. So make sure you turn them in. If you do not get that, just make sure you get it, because that was due Sunday. Okay, let's do one full stack flow. And then you guys, if you want, can take on the extra practice of documenting it one step further. Everything starts on the front end. So on the front end, we start at our app.js. Our app.js, number one, set up messages in state. So we have a place to put them. Then we come down and we say, number two, use effect runs when the component first loads and triggers the make API call function. Number three, fetch get to backend on port 3010 hits messages endpoint. We stop on the front end and switch over to the back end. In the back end, we've got to go find our messages, and we aren't going to this. Why aren't we going to this? Because this is the post request. When we don't specify a method here, it isn't going to default to post. It's going to default to get. So we say number 4, front end request received to get messages endpoint. Number 5, query the SQL Postgres database to get the messages and order by ID. Number 6, send the results of the DB query back in the response using JSON. Number 7, parse JSON from backend. Number 8, set data from number 6 and 7 into state. Number 9, messages state is updated. Number 10, because state is updated and messages list uses the messages prop connected to state, we have to re-render this component. Number 11, messages in this line matches the props from number 10. Number 12, loop over all the messages. Number 13, use the data in the message to determine which component should render. That is going to be sent or received. Then we do a comment here. Send in all the props the component needs to show properly. That is 14. And then 15, right? Yep. Get access to all the props from number 14. And then down here, skipping a little bit, number 16, use the props from number 14 and number 15 to make the content show up in our HTML. Okay, read through those 16 steps, make sure they make sense to you. Read through the rest of this code. You're obligated to stick around until 8:15, and then you are allowed to get out of here, but spend at least 3 minutes reviewing, seeing if you have questions here. You only get one more project to understand all of these concepts in here. After that one project, you guys need to be able to start implementing these concepts in your capstone, because for the scariest news of all, the final capstone check-in, believe it or not, is right around the corner on August 31st. That means we are 2 weeks away from your final capstone check-in before graduation. This capstone check-in is going to require that you've got some API flow working. Can be a third-party one, can be your own, but we need to have some API data flowing through this. Now, don't panic. Next week, you've got 2 days of me to do the blog project. We're going to see a more efficient way that we can connect to our database. And then we've got an entire week left to practice with those full stack concepts. But 2 weeks from Thursday, we've got that capstone check-in where we're going to want to see some authentication if your capstone is going to use it. And we want to see some API calls, whether that's happening in your code and your own API, or that's using a third-party API. Mel has also updated the terms list for you guys in Canvas. And if you head to the terms list, you will see in week 18, Mel has put in some database terms for you. So if you find terms helpful, check those out. I will put a link in the chat for that. Spend a couple minutes, review this code, see if you have any questions. If you feel confident with it, you are welcome to head out. I will stick around for at least another 5 minutes, see if any questions pop up. Really take a minute though to understand this isn't, woohoo, we're getting out of class 15 minutes early. These are a ton of concepts to sink in. And when you go to do this in your capstone, you are guaranteed to freeze up. And you're going to look at the entire chat app and be like, oh my God, where do I even start? Lean into the numbers, make sure you understand the flow of the data, think back to the order that we did it, and understand that the order that we did those steps is different than the order that we wrote that documentation. Make sure you understand it from both, and make sure that you understand that in order to be able to write this code, you have to be able to understand what each section of that line is doing. Now's your time to ask questions. If not, have a great evening, and I will see you at Open Hack on Thursday, because I am out tomorrow, but that does not mean we don't have class. You've got alumni coming in, alumnus, whatever the plural of alumni is, coming in and giving presentations tomorrow. Corwin,
excuse me.
The GitHub link is in Canvas. Mel just posted it without that final slash at the end. And I will make sure that that code gets uploaded right now. And then Rain, I'll come to your question.
That was my question, actually.
Yeah. Beautiful. 2 birds, 1 stone. That is now uploaded and good to go on GitHub. And in case you're looking for that link in the future, if you go to Canvas in the home section or the module section, it is the C5 My Code GitHub about halfway down. And then you can dive into week 18, day 2, and see all of our code is rocking and rolling already in here.
Max, can you explain, because I noticed that before when I was going to the GitHub code on there, like you have to click on, if you can go back, I believe like you had to go on the line with week 14 in order to get into week 18 kind of thing.
No, it's separated out. So if you go week 18, it's broken down into day.
Oh no, so that's week 18. Okay. It was something funny with week 14. I forget what had came up when I was looking at week 14 back then.
It could be that like we've got 2 copies of the chat app. So if you open chat and take a look in there, this is what we set up for week 14.
Yeah,
It also could be some days we did like 2 projects. So like in day 2, we've got the React version and the vanilla version. So that could be it as well. Is it bad that I don't remember doing the chat app in week 14? How close did we come to the one that we did? That's pretty close. Got our messages list. We sent our props down. Hopefully that was a good review for y'all.
it's not if you remember doing it, it's if you remember how to do it, which you do.
It would be really bad if I didn't. I'd be a pretty terrible teacher. And I will say, just to be clear, I do have reference code up. I go back to cohort 4 and I pull up the code that we did that I use that to reference. I don't always use it, but every now and then it just makes sure that I'm not going to step in it. Like I did tonight with the ID and go down an entire rabbit hole with timestamp and call AI a liar and then the AI be right. And turns out we just needed the order. But yes, I do cheat and I go back to the cohort 4 code.
I'm sure if we had all the cohort 4 code, we'd be using it too.
To be fair, it is on GitHub. We don't like hide any of that code.
I guess I should get familiar with that, huh?
Every now and then we don't follow, like I'll change the order of the projects, or you know, if I think you guys are ready for something sooner, I'll change that up. But you guys are an entire week ahead, and you have been since like week 5. I think we cut a week of HTML. So you guys are further ahead than any other cohort has been at this point. Self-deprecating humor, Amberlyn, is a Matthews family trait.
So does that mean that we get an extra week to pick our curriculum for that week and go over, review things that we want to review?
That's a great question right there.
I believe so. I am. Let's look at that schedule. So we are here. Alumni presentations and open hack are here. I've got 2 days picked out here for the blog project. Ryan is going to come in next Wednesday and Thursday and do authentication with Clerk with you guys. And then this week is kind of open. And this Tuesday is also open because Nathan comes back in the second half of this week and this entire week to do full stack deploys. And then you've got career week with Laura. And then the final week is only focused on capstones. That's kind of like an open office hours week. So if you guys want, we could make week 20 a open office hours week where you can either say, I'm trying to do this in my capstone, please show me how. Or you could say, hey, can you do this project in your own code? And then I can apply that into my capstone. So yeah, that is feasible. Normally we only give you this final week to do like the final blips on your capstone, but I'm out of shit to teach you guys, so it's on you to figure out what else you can squeeze from me. That's not true. There's always more stuff I can teach you guys, but you guys controlling the direction of the ship is more beneficial to you than me just throwing more stuff your way.
Yeah, that will help like a ton. Or give us give me the extra time.
Sometimes you need an excuse to be like, hey, there's this thing in JavaScript that I never really got. Could you explain objects to me? It's like, yeah, sure. You know, like this is the time to ask the questions and get it out, because the end of the capstone comes around, or the end of the program comes around. And then you're like, what am I supposed to do on Monday? Well, the whole career search. And yeah, that's why we put career week as the second to last week and give you a chance to learn all of that stuff from Laura. But there's a lot going on after graduation of now hitting the pavement and actually applying this stuff. Amberlyn, making it a happy hour would be a very bad idea. You would be getting some very sloppy code out of me by 8:29 p.m. All right, last call for any questions tonight. All right, see you guys. Class is on tomorrow. Alumni presentations, virtual as always. I will see you guys Thursday, open hack 6 p.m. But make sure you show up. Really excited about the presentations we got lined up.
Are you
Have a good
gonna
night.
take some pictures from the concert?
I will, sure. I only have lawn seats, so they're not going to be like anything spectacular. But I went a little risky and got second row for Pentatonics next Thursday. But it's limited view, so I'm either going to really hate it or have really great seats and a great price. But that's next week's concert, not tomorrow.
Who's performing again? At the concert?
It's Counting Crows and OAR tomorrow. And then next Thursday is Pentatonics, which is one of my favorite bands. 5-person a cappella group that won the Sing Off like a decade ago. But I've seen them a couple times and they're fantastic.
See you then. Well, after. Okay.
I know what you meant. See you guys.
Right.